So welcome to today's 2T Hour at SoundSCAPE Festival. My name is Irene Huang. Today we have Professor Anthony Davis with us. Anthony has so many accomplishments. I don't really know where to start. Accomplished pianist, composer with 2020 Pulitzer Prize winner in music with his opera, The Central Park Five. Today we have Anthony with us. Welcome, Anthony.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Ian. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here and to talk to you. Well, today I wanted to look a little bit. I've been recently involved in reviving an opera that I wrote 35 years ago, my opera X, The Life and Times of Malcolm X. That's going to be at Michigan Opera next season in May, and then travel to Omaha and Seattle and go eventually end up at the Met in 2023. And so, this has been a very exciting prospect, and it was ironic that during the whole COVID period, I remember about a year and a half ago, or actually in March, I remember I didn't have any commissions, but all my commissions were canceled. I think this is a commonplace thing for composers. And so I was wondering what to do. So I decided I'd revisit X, and I would try to prepare a score of excerpts for orchestra with chorus and the largest scale possible. So and put it into the computer. And the reason was, when I wrote X in 35 years ago, I wrote, everything was written by hand. I didn't use computer I had no computer score of it. So when I was inputting it, I couldn't resist making changes and sort of looking at my 35-year-old self or 34-year-old self and trying to figure out, and also having grown over the last 35 years in working on music. And so I ended up now, finishing a revised score that actually has some new material in it. I wrote a new duet for Malcolm and Betty will be in the opera. I reworked the overture. I've done a number of different things, and it's so funny because Malcolm's story is so relevant and pertinent to today, and it speaks to some of the issues. Malcolm, and it is in a way previews and foreshadows, the whole Black Lives Matter movement, in the sense that that he was speaking about some of the same things, in the 60s, and so and particularly looking at the opera, there were moments in the opera that were so prescient. Thulani Davis, who wrote the libretto, I remember I'm going to play it for you, is Malcolm's aria, which ends Act 1 of X. And in this aria, Malcolm has been arrested he has robbed a jewelry store in Boston, Massachusetts. And so he's arrested. And what's interesting about it is he's being interrogated, but you never hear the questions. You just see a spotlight on Malcolm. And Malcolm's answers are not what his interrogators expect. So the name of the aria is "You Want the Truth, but You Don't Want to Know." And the truth is about the history of violence against African Americans, the history of violence that involved his family. His father's murder, his mother's descent into madness after that, and there are things in the libretto that are so striking. So there's a moment in the aria when he says, "You had your foot on me, always pressing." So when George Floyd incident happened, and I thought of that, the foot on me, always pressing it. It spoke so directly to what was going on, and so it's no accident that X would have its moment now, a moment of revival, because it's a moment that it's also spurred by the interest in opera entities and exploring and looking at the issue of race and how what their relationship to race is, and also how music can address these issues. And that's something that I've done, been part of my work from, I say, from almost the beginning, from at least 35 years ago, that with many of the pieces I've created have directly addressed issues of race. So what I like to do now is play, this is Malcolm's aria. This is a very recent performance from just last January. The Philadelphia Orchestra performed the aria with Devon Tynes singing the role of Malcolm. So this is a concert performance, during the quarantine. So you'll see the musicians have masks, etc. And so I'll play it. This is Malcolm's aria from just a few months ago. Okay, just a second. Okay. Okay, let me share screen. I always forget to do that. Okay, that's everything should work. Okay, Bing. Okay.
tell you what I know. truth is you've been on me a very long time. Longer than I can say. As long as I've been living, you've had your foot on me, always pressing. My truth is white men killed my own men, drove my mother mad. My truth is rough, my truth could kill, my truth is fury. They always told me you don't have a chance. You're a nigger after all. You can jitterbug and prance, but you'll never run the ball. My truth told me quit before you start. My truth told me staying alive is all you've got. I've shined your shoes, I've sold your dope, hauled your bootleg, played with hustlers' hope. But the crime is mine. I will do your time so you can sleep. I won't be out to get you on the street at night, but I won't forget any evil that's white. My truth is a hammer coming from the back. It will beat you down when you least expect. I wouldn't tell you what I know. You want the truth. You want the truth. You want the truth, but you don't want to know.
Anthony, can you mute your microphone? You're currently.
I can.
Yeah.
Hi. Okay. So that was the performance of the aria, and the aria ends Act One of the opera, and it's an aria about rage. It's about Malcolm's rage, and it's rage against the circumstances that led to his getting involved, becoming Detroit Red in Act One. And the way the opera was written originally, the idea was that each act of the opera represented a name change, his transformation. From Act One is his transformation from Malcolm Little to become Detroit Red, where he becomes a street criminal, dealing with as a drug dealer, and a hustler in Boston. Then Act Two is his transition from and its conversion to the Nation of Islam and becoming Malcolm X in Act Two. And Act Three is his conversion to Orthodox Islam, Sunni Islam, becoming a Sunni Islam with his pilgrimage to Mecca and becoming El Hajj Malik El Shabazz. So that, and it was kind of a neat thing that each act was a name change, was a signifier. And that's a structural idea that we came up with very quickly in the development of the opera. And working on X was very interesting. When we started working on, I was always interested in, I think since I was in 10th grade, I think in 10th grade, I decided that I wanted to write was going to write an opera. And I was living in Italy at the time. And not that I was supposed to opera, because I didn't go to my parents weren't opera fans, so they didn't go to the opera. But I read Nietzsche, and I read The Birth of Tragedy. I was taking a philosophy class in my Italian school, and I got very excited about the Apollonian, the Dionysian, and all this stuff. So I began to thinking about Nietzsche and about Nietzsche's idea, looking at Greek tragedy. And I thought he was trying that time, rather naively, to apply it to what he thought the emergence of Wagner and German opera, etc. But he would later repudiate Wagner in his letter to Wagner. But I was fascinated with that, and I thought that what he was describing, this idea of the collision of the Dionysian and the Apollonian, I thought was more apt in describing American music than it was German music. And because of that, American music is rooted both in the European and the African. And so I began to think, this is in my 10th grade mind, I began to think about this idea of what happens when you bring the improviser into opera. What happens when you bring in this whole other tradition, the tradition of coming from the African diaspora, this idea of the concept of rhythm, time, the idea of the propulsion that's in the opera, et cetera. And at the same time, you can have all the structure and formal ideas that come that are part of European tradition of opera, et cetera. So I thought I was looking at creating this new synthesis. And I thought that would be interesting to, and I thought eventually I would like to compose an opera that would do those things. And then it took me a number of years after my 10th grade to have the tools to be able to do that. And so finally in the 1980s, during I think in 1984, when I was approached by the kitchen. Do I have any ideas for an opera? And I said, yeah, I'd like to do an opera about Malcolm X. And that came about too because my brother was an actor, and he was in a play playing the role of Malcolm X in a play called El Hajj Malik. And so I went to the play, and I saw my brother in it, and he came backstage afterward, and we talked about it. He said I should write a musical about Malcolm X, and I said, a musical? Well, no, this is. I mean, what are you gonna have, the dancing fruit of Islam? What is that? So I thought about. I said that Malcolm story is an opera because he's the tragic hero, and that goes back to, again, you know, my introduction to Nietzsche, and also my thoughts, you know, also my relationship. I studied a lot of Wagner too. You know, when I was at Yale, I had a teacher who was a Wagner scholar, and so when I was taking 19th century music, it was all about Wagner. so it was so I sort of was force fed Wagner, you know, in college. So I was already interested in it, in the idea and the structure and the idea of using motives and leitmotifs, etc., as building blocks within the opera. So when so in X, what I decided to do in the aria you just heard, there are all these motives that repeat underneath the vocal line, and a lot of them came from a piano piece I wrote called Middle Passage. That was I'd written for Ursula Oppens. Originally, Ursula Oppens commissioned it, and it was interesting because when we were doing the first rehearsals of X, and I hadn't, you know, written the whole score, which is I naively wrote the score directly. I just wrote to an ensemble of 10 musicians, and for the first workshop. I wrote Levine, the director, who was a kind of creative advisor for X, had decided to stage the overture. But the problem was I hadn't written the overture yet. And so so we go to the first rehearsal, and she says, okay, let's start with the overture. And I said, well, I hadn't written the overture. I was going to write the whole opera first, and I was going to figure out what the overture was going to be. So I thought about it for a minute, and I said, well, you know, I do have this piece, Middle Passage, and that would be really interesting overture, you know, kind of as an introduction. So I just sat down, I played the piano piece, and they started staging it. And so that's what it is. So then after that, I said, I have to justify doing this. So I started integrating elements of the piano piece into the fabric of the opera. So it holds the opera together in some ways. It's like they're points of departure in it. And it was interesting to me to also break down a piano, these fragments from the piano piece into different sections. And also, I think in terms of the overall approach to tonality in the opera comes out of the piano piece too, which is interesting. So these motives come back, and they have emotional weight because they recur in different very important points in the story. So when you hear you know, one particular motive, you hear it in the child's aria. Malcolm's a child, and an aria called "Mama Help Me," and then it comes back in Malcolm's aria that you just heard, and then later in the Audubon Ballroom. So this idea of these musical motives sort of haunting him. It's as if also the violence that surrounds him, the violence that consumes him, the violence that is a part of our culture, who we are and what America is. And so I wanted to kind of capture that sense of this underlying turbulence that's always there, that's rooted in the fact that our whole culture is based on slavery, and the idea that America wouldn't be what it is in terms of culture without slavery. There's no way to look at America and American culture apart from that. And so that became a kind of central theme to me. And of course, the piano piece was about Middle Passage, was about, of course, the voyage of Africans to America, you know, about in the middle, and that's what Middle Passage refers to. So it's to me this violence and turbulence that haunts us and haunted Malcolm is something that I think the opera tries to address in a kind of visceral way that's always there and always there. And part of it is also the sense of the rhythmic inevitability. I was interested at the time in the 80s. I had I was studying South Indian music at Wesleyan after I went to Yale, and I was sort of really excited about that. But I also was able to go to performances of the gamelan, hearing the Wang performances, etc. And I was really captivated by that, and a sense of what I would call rhythm drama. And so I began to think about ways in which rhythm could be a structural device, the way Wagner used leitmotifs. So I have rhythmic motives that recur and that are part of the momentum of the opera, and yet also part of the structure that holds the piece together. And so the opera has that element in it, and this sense of this driving quality that's always there. That's pretty unique to X. It's not makes it very different from other operas that were happening at the time. And and then also one of the things that we looked at in X was my brother's initial thought was that the opera that there was a parallel between the story of Malcolm's political evolution and the evolution of jazz, the evolution of creative music from, let's say, the late 40s to the 1960s. So you could look at the late 40s as the kind of end of the big band period, the jump blues, Duke Ellington, Billy Strayhorn in the 1940s, the emergence of bebop, etc. And then in the 50s, then finally by the end of the 50s, emergence of modal jazz and the avant-garde and in the 1960s. So that this idea of the music, there being a musical parallel with the actual history, and that was rooted in something very real. When I was working on X, I had an old family friend, Billy Taylor, who was this great jazz pianist, and he used to host a radio program on WBAI that was every Sunday in the 1960s. And he would often have John Coltrane as a guest, or Archie Shepp, or Cecil Taylor as the more avant-garde aspect, Miles, et cetera. But what was interesting is that what preceded the jazz concert on the radio was Malcolm's lecture. Malcolm would give a sermon on Sunday. So he would have it at that 1 hour, and then there'd be the jazz hour afterward. And Malcolm would always stay for the jazz because he loved the music, and he was always around the music. So literally, I had this image of Malcolm giving a sermon and then staying and listening to Coltrane play A Love Supreme. Which to me was the ultimate thing. So there are elements in the opera, not in this aria, but in Act 2, Scene 1, when he makes his conversion in the Nation of Islam. It's actually when they sing Allahu Akbar. It's a big modal thing. It's that very inspired by Coltrane and McCoy Tyner. So and that was a big part of my musical evolution when I was early as a jazz pianist in the early 70s. I was obsessed with that music, and so it was very, very much a part of my developing my piano playing, and then of course Cecil Taylor and other things like that. So anyway. So that's all kind of part of how the opera came to be, and the aria is in a way a culmination of the end of Act 1, and then but in doing this new version of the opera companies were interested in creating a 2-act version of the opera rather than the opera originally was 3 acts, 2 hours and 45 minutes long. In terms of the length of the music, and they wanted me to do the opera in about 2 hours, maybe, or something. So I mean, I had to cut stuff, which I hate, which was really cool, too. So I made a much more concise version of it, a 2-hour version, and so I had to have a different ending of the first part of the opera, whereas the original one was, add to Act One where he goes to prison. Now it ends with his conversion, where he joins the Nation of Islam, and which was originally Act Two, Scene One, and the transition between Act One and Act Two worked really rather well. I found different ways to make that work. So it was an interesting project to re-envision the opera like this, and as a result, when I got to end of Act Two, now that there wasn't going to be a break between Act Two and Act Three, I had to write new transition music between the two. So that resulted in a duet with Malcolm and Betty. That's completely new. That will be heard for the first time when it's done in Michigan. So I was very excited because it added a new dimension to the piece. And I think in writing that section, I was sort of, there's been so many versions of Malcolm since the opera. Spike Lee's film was 5 years after I did the opera. And then recently, a night in Miami, I saw a movie that was a film that was done with Regina King directed. That was very interesting because had a scene with Betty and Malcolm. So I called Thulani and said, "Oh, there's a scene with Betty and Malcolm, and we should have that." That's something so I ended up writing something that scene in the opera that has that a moment, an intimate moment that wasn't in the original at all. So that's the way operas are a living, breathing thing that can change, and you can think about, reflect on it, and also reflecting on, what has transpired. I mean, one of the things that's disheartening about our country is that as things change, they remain the same. So all the issues that Malcolm was addressing in the 60s still are pertinent today, and the fact that that the violence and the excess violence of the police, et cetera, that we all face every day is something that Malcolm talked about in the early 60s. So it's interesting to me to bring those things forward again, and in the spirit of what has been a kind of reawakening with Black Lives Matter. Yeah. So, you have any questions you want to ask me about Malcolm, or anything else? I can talk a little bit about how I address these issues in other operas too. But any questions from you guys?
Tony.
I had a question about, actually my microphone's here, sorry. I had a question about the improvisation. You said that, in kind of putting together the Apollonian and Dionysian, that, the traditions of improvisation found their way into the opera. Did they find their way into the opera, or was that a compositional model that you used?
Both. I think it definitely, I had in the opera, I had original production, I had 10 improvisers in the orchestra. I brought my own players into the orchestra. And so it's more evident, I mean, in this scene, the clarinet solo that's played in the beginning with the pedal, they have that kind of A pedal, and then the clarinet's playing. So that was improvised. It was much more a big deal when J.D. Perrin played it originally, who's a wonderful clarinet player. And I really conceived it for him, for his playing, because he was obsessed with multiphonics. And so it's written with his multiphonics in mind. And then he's able to improvise over the pedal with a bowed vibraphone. And so that it was really interesting. It was funny when we first did the opera. J.D. is so conscientious. And he was thinking about his solos, and he said, "Well, can I see the whole score?" I said, "Sure." Okay, so I gave him the whole score of the opera. So he studied the whole score, and so then when he first did the solo, he was like a mini overture of the whole thing. So I said, "JD, no, I don't need an overture of the whole thing. No. So what you have to do is just play the moment, play that moment. and I told him what's happening on stage. This is what's happening on stage. Malcolm has been arrested. There's a spotlight on him. He's brought in. He's handcuffed and with his hands behind his back, looking at something that these people that are interrogating him. So this is this weird moment before that. So and I want you to deal with the pedal, what you hear around you, what the orchestra is doing with the pedal, and then think about what multiplies or use space, and also the vibraphone will be the vibraphone will interact with you. Because I wanted that music to be, and that's important to me because also the spontaneity of the moment that it may irritate directors sometimes, because sometimes my music is not on the clock the way directors usually like to work in terms of lighting cues and all that stuff, because at that moment, I mean, JD could play for, it could vary in length. It could be a minute or it could be a minute and a half, whatever, but I want him to really express himself and there are other moments in the opera that for the other players too. And I think my model for that was always Ellington and Mingus. Duke Ellington and Charles Mingus have always been huge influences on my music. And Miles and Coltrane and other things. But in this case, this idea of showcasing the individual abilities of players, what they would do, and it's a problem now in re-envisioning the opera now 35 years later, thinking about, I wrote this for J.D. Parent. I wrote this for, I had, Art Barron or Ray Anderson playing trombone. I had, so Abdul Wadu played cello. So Ferona Clough was the drummer. So because I knew that how they played and what they would bring to the occasion. So that was part of that was in the conception of the music. In the Boston scenes, when Malcolm becomes Detroit Red, it's all through the blues. It's the blues is what indoctrinates him into the street life, brings him into the life. And so I use a lot of blue. So Art Barron, who played with Duke Ellington, and the Duke Ellington Orchestra, played a lot of the obligato things on the trombone that were so much part of bringing those scenes to life. And I had a wonderful singer, Thomas Young, who was also a great jazz singer, who could scat, who could improvise, and he brought that to the opera. He was an amazing performer who could sing high notes of Rossini, high D's and high C's effortlessly as a tenor with perfect diction, and then also scat, scat like Ella Fitzgerald. So, that's a unique combination of talent. And that role of Elijah Muhammad and Street with the double role was conceived when I worked on it. It was really written with him in mind. So there are lots of idiosyncratic things about it too. So it's interesting because it's very hard to cast that part now because of his that unique skill set that he had. And so there are moments in the all through the opera that reflect that. Marilyn Crispell played the piano on the recording, so there were moments for her when she gets to improvise and on different textures, and I knew her playing well. She and I used to collaborate, play piano duets. So it's involved with knowing these players really well too. Yeah. Well, thanks for the question.
Corey.
Hey.
Hi. I'm wondering, now that you've revised the score, have you pulled back the amount of improvisation that's in the opera? Or
a good question. Somewhat. Not. I think just in terms of repetitions, because sometimes when I wrote the original opera, I had the concern of making sure that I had enough, that everyone had a chance to really play. So now it's really attuned to the dramatic focus. dramatic focus of the opera. What is just sustaining the momentum? Where does the improvisation work? It's still integral to the piece. There isn't quite as much of it, but there are other things that I had a lot of repetition in it, and some of it was for kind of trying to sustain an atmosphere, a different kind of atmosphere. So I cut back on that somewhat, made it so it's much more direct, and I think overall it should work really well, and I'm excited to do that. I also, there's an aria for Elijah Muhammad that it's not going to be in this production. But I think I'm very excited about this version, because I think it works. It's pretty compelling. Also, in the original version, the overture was way too long, because I wrote it as a piano concerto. and Rich could not, because it came out of a piano piece, and so when I used to play it, I used to improvise all the stuff, but there's still improvised moments, but that's now it's much more concise, because it was way too long before, in terms of how the overture played out, and there are other aspects of it. But improvisation is still integral to the piece. Yeah. I wrote some additional stuff. I think when I had, there's a stride part that's where you need a zoot, a conch, and a pad, a lot of that Street sings. And the whole piece has a rap in front of it. It's really inspired by Fats Waller. It's Fats Waller kind of inspired music. And when I got to that, when I was doing it this time, so I wrote it out. I wrote a Fats Waller solo that would what a Fats Waller solo would be, kind of my version of a Fats Waller. But it was fun to do, because sometimes I used to leave things to the improviser it was fun for me, in a way, to write something that it captures an improvisational moment, to see if I could write the way someone would play. And that's always something I've tried to do.
Caroline has a question. Caroline.
Yeah.
Hi, I have so many things I would love to say. Well, first of all, I just really love the many influences and inspirations that you are talking about having drawn from for this opera. And I love that in the modern age of opera, that this is becoming permissible is not quite the right word, but to be able to draw from so many more influences and different musical genres and things. I think that's very cool. So I really love hearing you name drop all these Coltrane and Charles Mingus. So I have a question. I'm just wondering, I'm very interested in the idea of arts as a tool for activism. And it's really cool to see that this opera, written several years ago, can still have relevance now and can really pack a punch now. Is that, and you mentioned that this is something that you want to address in a lot of your work. So is that something that you find is a driving force behind your compositional output, activism? And
well, I think it's been a driving force. When I did AMISTAD, which was about slave rebellion and actually the roots of who we are as Americans, looking at the AMISTAD rebellion and the trial of the AMISTAD trial. So that was certainly another piece that does that. Central Park 5 is very directly does that. It's like and it was very exciting to do that. I wrote that. I did the first version of that opera, opened 3 days after the election in 2016, which was really weird, because Trump as a featured character in the opera, and I always looked at that the Central Park 5 case as beginning of Trump's political career, and how he exploited with racial tensions and racial divide for his own personal gain, and that's very evident in the opera. And it was interesting when we did a performance in Newark in 2016. That was kind of preliminary performance. When Trump appeared, when the guy who plays Trump appeared for his bow at the end of the show, everyone booed. They booed. They were booing Trump. It was a fantastic moment. It was just like, like one of those Italian like villain operas, like it was kind of commedia dell'arte moments, like here's the evil character in the opera, and they're gonna boo him, and then they cheer because he was great. He really captured Trump. So it was interesting for me to write for a truly malevolent character, and also to find out, to explore what was the attraction, why people are drawn to him, why people are drawn to that kind of invective. And that was really interesting to me. And sometimes for me, looking at characters like that, trying to figure out what draws you to the flame, and that to me is a big open human question that sometimes we try to ignore, but so I thought that was important to have. And so I think I was always interested in politics. This is something, I remember in ninth grade, I thought I was going to be a lawyer and go into politics, and that's what I was going to do. So that's something that's always been really important to me. But my way of doing it through music, because music ended up being much more my passion for that. So I could find ways to address those things through music. And I think music can never be really, in my mind, music is never divorced from music. This idea of music being some abstract thing that is not connected to social and political issues is ridiculous to me. I mean, so to me, it's always an expression of your time, always an expression of what your relationship to your time is, always an expression of whether you ignore what's around you, that says something, or whether you embrace it, whether you try to figure it out, whether you try to embody it in what you do. So that's something that's very, very, really important to me. And I think music is unique in that, an opera particularly, because we can like take apart a political moment to look at what the forces are behind it, and also, because it's a reflective medium too. It's a medium that allows you to reflect, allows you to look back, and also its relation. It's not the best medium for telling, the stories in real time. It's not about that. So I had all these other things come into play, and music can convey those things, and also give you a sense of of discovering connections, the connections to you and your life, and also connections within the story and the music itself. So that those connections are really important to me. I mean, someone could argue that I remember when I first did X, everyone said, "Oh man, these critics would get mad because they said, oh, it's so manipulative. You're trying to make me feel something." I said, "Oh wow, how horrible is that?" It was like some kind of post-Cage moment where everyone said, "You're not allowed to make people feel things," And so I kind of rejected that whole thing, like that kind of modernist impulse and modernist, the cold distance. I wasn't interested in that, and that's something that's been part of my aesthetic from the beginning.
Thank you for that. I think we have Lindsay has a question.
Hi, this has been so great so far. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks.
I'm just curious what it was like, if you could talk a little bit more about going back to the score after 35 years, and did you think about it in between? And when you were inserting the new piece, did you kind of have to put yourself in like that mindset of where you were composing at that point?
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because and I think looking back at it's like I mean, you're not old enough to look back that far, but I mean, but looking back at my 34-year-old self, you know what I mean? And it was so exciting for me because that was my first opera. So everything was opening up. It was I learned more during that period than I ever learned in terms of music, you know, what I had to do. And so the excitement is evident. You know, I look at the score, I could see that was engaging. There was an excitement about it. So I did want to mess with that. But at the same time, I wanted to like take the idiom I had and I was trying to be very careful too in that I was drawing upon things that were already there some way, you know. So like, for example, there's a pedal that comes in that from Malcolm's arias before, and you know, so I try to root things, the new things I did, and things that were already there, you know, that were at part of the opera, but something that could expand on ideas that were already, you know, present earlier in the piece. So so you have to be kind of true to the idiom. And that was really interesting for me, you know, to try to recapture that the idiom that I had established earlier, and so it was fun. But also I wanted to do something that was not in the opera, like that kind of an intimate moment that I've done in opera since X, but X was much more. It was much more about Malcolm's public life than his private life, and that was on purpose, but also so that we don't get sued. But but also I think, but also to bring in this moment that that was barely orchestrated, because I was interested in just hearing the voices, and it would be interesting and have this moment in the middle of the opera where, you know, the voices just come out. And I was thinking a little bit of Peter Grimes, the moment, the duet with Grimes that happens in the first act. It's this beautiful a cappella thing that happens, you know, with this kind of E pedal that's in the music. And I've always loved that moment in Grimes, and so I was thinking about that in a way, you know, well, no, that kind of moment, what would be like to have this intimate moment that so be very different from the rest of the opera, which is much more about his public life and his public persona, and so now to have this little moment in the opera that's sort of more naked. Yeah.
Thank you. Next we have John Paul. John.
Hi, Anthony. This has been really great so far. I was wondering if you might talk. You write a lot about historical events, and I was wondering how you handle what people know about an event before, or a person before they come in. How you might, if you think about contextualizing that, or how you handle that if there's a lot of information, like AMISTAD might not be well known.
That's a great question. That's a great question, and that's always something I've had battles with the producers about. And part of it is, when I was doing X, I remember they said, "Well, you have to have a glossary of terms and all those things," you know, because I talk about Marcus Garvey and fruit, and you know, the mentions, you know, the kind of roots of the Nation of Islam and the history of that, and going back to the 50s and 40s, you know, with other political movements, like Malcolm's parents were involved in, you know, the Red Star movement of going back to Africa, and so with Marcus Garvey. So I was very interesting because I said, well, you know, I mean, Wagner didn't worry about whether people knew Norse gods, right? You know, if I have to do all this expository work in an opera, it would be deadly. It's boring, deadly. I can't. You don't have time in opera to do that shit. You know, so part of it is you have to assume stuff, and then that I mean, you could have a little thing in the program, saying, okay, this is the history, and what they would do, with Wagner or whatever. But I think that, and then I think Amistad was really the case of that, because we really looked into all the different aspects of that, and the aspects of the trial, John Quincy Adams' role, et cetera, all that stuff. But I think that also opera is a visceral experience, so that you don't have time to do all that exposition. So there has to be some assumptions for that, and yeah. So in a way, we tell the story, we embody the story, but it's not a made for TV thing. It's not like we can explain everything. That's not it. And I don't think opera really suited for that.
I think we just have enough time for one short question. James.
Hi, lovely to meet you.
Great
hello.
to meet you. Yeah.
Yeah, hi.
Hey.
I was wondering if you are thinking about working on, or like looking into more and more elements of like magical realism, and yeah, because especially your work brings to mind, of course, the incredible just stories of Toni Morrison, and I think of that collaboration between her and Richard Danielpour, the Margaret Garner opera. And I'm just very interested in like how you would think about and approach magical realism with like an opera that specifically uses like I don't know, various like symbolisms and like non-realistic realisms to make your points, especially since everything you do is so historical. But like, yeah, it's an interesting.
Well, I think Amistad has that. I mean, it's historical, but the central character in the Amistad is the trickster god. And so on one level, the Amistad opera is the trickster story of how the trickster came to America. So the trickster Eshu, Yoruba's trickster god, is so it has that aspect of magic realism. That's the idea of the relationship of gods to us, God to man, gods among themselves. We had a goddess of the waters as well, Yemaya, in the opera. So I think that that's something I love. I'm very drawn to magic realism, and that's something I'm in a different way. I think TANIA had a really interesting, a weird opera because it was a comedy, a really dark comedy. And so the premise of the opera is that the stage is in two halves. There's the bedroom of Patty Hearst, Patty today, and then the closet world. So the closet world keeps getting bigger. So the idea is the SLA who kidnapped Patty Hearst it's the reversal. So they're behind the closet door. So she opens the closet door and they kidnap her through the door. So this big door is always there that separates this weird world, the Tanya world, from the Patty world. And but I think that's something I like to deconstruct history too. That I'm not just I don't do like CNN made for TV things or all that stuff, because you take history and then you can invent with it, you can play with it and deconstruct it. So with Amistad, TANIA, particularly the operas after X, I think they've been much more in that mold. I'm working on an opera now called Fire Across the Tracks, which is about the Tulsa Race Massacre. And that too it's all coming from individual stories, from Buck Franklin's narrative about it, and a woman's narrative about it. All these individual version of what went on, what happened. So I think history is rich with that. It's rich with, because when you look at Oklahoma, at that time, Oklahoma was amazing, weird place, because it was supposed to be a Native American part of the country. They moved all the tribes to Oklahoma because they were supposed to have that land, and so there was the home of the Choctaw, it's home of the, you know, all these different tribes, and the slaves, when they came in, when the Trail of Tears with the Native American people had some of these tribes had slaves, so they brought black slaves to Oklahoma. So this weird dynamic of, you know, the people who are Native American and black and were former slaves of Native Americans, you know, who that was part of this story of, you know, the unique story of Oklahoma, which is why Oklahoma is such a strange place. And I think that those elements are so rich, and see, magic realism exists in the history. The history is part of that. I mean, what motivated, you know, for example, Toni Morrison's book Sula, for example, which is the basis for that, Margaret Garner, that the Sula, you know, were real things, you know, things from actual stories that she could work with. So, but that's something I'm really drawn to. I want to do Invisible Man as an opera for that reason too, Ralph Ellison. You know, and there's something about that man underground that was my first idea for an opera, was to do Invisible Man, actually, before X. And I hope to have a chance to do that before I'm done with doing opera.
Thank you so much, Anthony. This has been hugely inspirational.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Great to see you. Great to see you. Nice to meet everyone.
Yeah. So that concludes our 2T hour for today, and I'll see everybody tomorrow.
Great. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.